welcome to a special presentation of the Drunken Odyssey. I'm here with Samantha Nickerson, who is a correspondent for the Drunken Odyssey, my wonderful friend Jared Silvia, who is a writer here in Orlando. He's most excellent. Dale Lucas, who is a bona fide fantasy writer.
Thank you.
So, Ace Books has kindly offered us some Dune coloring books to color in, partly to celebrate this new hardcover edition, and partly to celebrate the Dune films made by Denis Villeneuve that are pretty good.
Yes.
So, all right, why don't we take a look?
All right, let's do it.
Smells fantastic.
Let's get the new book smell.
Yes, it does.
I like it.
What's that smell from? Is it glue?
It's got to be the paper.
Oh, it's
I
the
think.
okay, paper and ink style.
Wow, each one came with a publicist info. All
All
right.
We'll make a stack.
So, did everyone already look through the book and think of a page
Oh my
that they
god,
want?
there's a page for the Desert Mouse.
The Muad'Dib.
Wow.
That's the one I was actually looking at. Yeah.
All right, so I'm clearly not the biggest Dune fan here. So, and here's my experience with Dune. I read it when the original film came out, circa 1984. I read it in high school, liked it, but my reading was so furious at the time that it was like, okay, just one more on the pile. And, I feel bad when I watch the David Lynch film because I know he doesn't want me watching it. He doesn't want anyone watching that film of Dune. What was it? Alfred Smithy
Yeah.
is the name given to the director because he didn't want to take credit for it because he lost the final cut. So, I've been going through the audiobook and watching the films again. And I think I might be on the verge of becoming a Dune fan because
Yeah.
now I've reached such immersion that I'm not getting lost even when the films are a little confusing or a little dense with the information.
Yeah.
Because the way the book works also, it requires, I think, a deliberate pace because there's exposition and then the exposition is interrupted for more exposition and then you get random snippets from history books detailing the lives of the characters in the story. So I find there's like a pretty big hump to get over to like Dune and to absorb it. But once you get over that hump, there's so many great things happening with the story. And despite the fact that I've met many readers who don't necessarily love Dune or like Dune, I've never heard any actual disrespect. People going, oh yeah, it's bad. Like,
Yeah.
even the people who were like, I couldn't quite get through, but nevertheless, they really seem to like it.
Yeah.
So what's your story with Dune, Dick?
Let me see. I saw the movie when it was first released in 1984, the David Lynch version, or the Alan Smithy version, whichever you prefer. And at the time, I just saw it because I was like 9 years old and I would see anything with a spaceship in it. And it made no sense to me whatsoever, but I was like, okay, giant sandworms, lots of desert, that's cool. That's all right. And over the years, I watched the one on Sci-Fi Network, but I think I finally read the book. I think I finally read the book in about 1996 or so when I was in college, and it was just, and I had heard for years how difficult it was. And when I read it, maybe just because I had seen the movie and I was a little bit familiar with some of the stuff going on, it didn't feel so completely befuddling. It was like, okay, I can work with this.
When you're warned how difficult it's going to be, it can be intimidating. And
Yeah.
then,
Or inspiring, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
but when you actually read it, you're like, oh, okay, it's hard. It's not that hard.
Right.
It's mostly, I think, a matter of patience.
Yeah, and there's just a lot. There's a lot to take on. But, so I read it and I loved it, and I've read it a couple more times over the years. I've always held out hope that there would be a really good film adaptation, and I think Denis Villeneuve finally did it for, about as good as anyone could hope to. But yeah, I just really appreciate it, and for me, it's all like just a world building thing, and the fact that it's so interesting and so well realized, and also it harkens back to just like good old adventure literature from the olden days.
Well, I think it's almost every genre kind of mashed
Yes.
together.
Yeah.
There's philosophy here, to be sure. It covers galactic politics, war tactics, geology,
Yeah.
agriculture. Like there are just so many different angles to the storytelling. I find it mind-boggling, and up to a point, and then it's kind of like once you acclimatize, you're like, all right,
Yeah. This is
all
pretty
right.
cool.
I'm starting to feel at home here, and I think it's one of the things that fantasy and science fiction, sometimes the exposition area is a lot broader than with most fiction, because if the rules of that physical universe are different, well, we need to know to be able to
Yeah.
follow what's going on.
Yeah.
And in the case of Dune, there's just front loading so much information, maybe too much information. But on the other hand, I also think of like another epic, which is The Godfather, and like one way to look at Dune is it's kind of The Godfather in space.
That's a good comparison.
And there are references to all kinds of things going on in the story,
Yeah.
but some of which you don't get to see, but you realize, oh, there's a larger world
Yeah.
happening than just what we're seeing, even though what we're seeing is plenty. All right, we should probably start coloring here. Samantha's decided she's going to win, even though I don't think this is a contest.
I
All
just
right.
think that you think I'm going to win. This is projection.
Well,
yeah, not a bad projection at all.
No, not at all. I do like winning, but
I-
it's not a contest. John, it's not a contest.
says the person intent on winning. I would never wager against you. All right, and so, yeah, what can we say about the illustrations here, Jared? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a Mobiusness to them, which I'm actually not familiar with the illustrator who worked on this, who I'm going to find out, Tomislav Tomic, but I think that when you look through this and you get that sense of this sort of like French bande dessinée, like, comic illustrative style, I think that reference to like the Alejandro Jodorowsky Dune project, which I think is a useful reference, and such part of the reason why I brought my Alejandro Jodorowsky
Jodorowsky and Alia.
yeah, the various, and specifically, I decided I was going to pick colors that came from the tarot deck he worked on, because like the proper coloring in the tarot deck is very important to him. So,
Absolutely.
You wouldn't want to tempt
You're
the
really
gods.
working on the spiritual aspect of this.
well, I think Dune is a spiritual
mystical.
movie. And it has a mysticism that is, I think, part of what makes it good science fiction, right? That's the space where and you could say the same of things like Star Wars, right? Because they the Jedi is like an interesting kind of mystical space, but yeah, the Dune mysticism is within that sort of obviously it's a prophetic risen again savior kind of story, which, okay, that's classic, but then there is this other layer of very like natural world mysticism, and again, it's something that I really appreciate about those stories.
Well, I think that's really what attracted Jodorowsky, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Obviously, in the documentary about his sort of failed attempt to make a Dune film, obviously there's a lot of conversations about this sort of like acid trip aspect of his own fascination with the source material. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, returning to these stories, I couldn't help but think of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. It's like, okay, so we begin on a desert planet, and there's an emperor who is not going to appear on screen.
Yeah.
And of course, I think kind of like Dune, like Star Wars is kind of just yanking on all of these different pop cultural threads.
Yeah.
But I would be shocked if George Lucas had never come across Dune while working up to Star Wars.
Well, that's the story, right? About the book, the famous book that was generated that had all this sort of like source material that, like the illustrations and the costume design and all these other things, that was floating around. That's how people like Dan Bannon and H.R. Giger and even Mobius, found a different life in that sort of like Hollywood development cycle of the mid to late 70s and early 80s. But yeah, I mean, I think for sure that's a useful reference.
I think Jodorowsky's Dune is my favorite Dune movie.
Yeah.
Which, no offense to either movie, because I think both of them have plenty to recommend them. Samantha, what are you drawing there? What page did you choose?
Princess Irulan?
Right. Irulan? How do we pronounce that?
Yeah, how do we
I
pronounce
believe it's Irulan. That's how I always said
Irulan.
it, but
I'm coloring a princess. I really like, as far as like the craft of this book, that the lines on the clothing are more suggestive than concrete. Like, it gives you, it lets you know like where things are supposed to go, but it's not insisting that you color in that area.
yeah.
It's like some dashed lines, some lighter shading.
It forces you to make actual interpretations, not just what color goes where, but how you're going to approach the spacing and the lines.
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
Exactly.
And frankly, I am a little intimidated by this coloring book because with normal crayon use, I just don't see how I can
Well, it
get
is a
this
lot.
done. But on the other hand, I'm also not going to freak out about it. I'm going to see what I can do here.
Yeah, I mean, it's like comic book colorist work.
Actually, yeah, it does have a quality like that.
And so one thing that I am kind of tickled by is just how much love went into the creation of these coloring books.
Yeah.
I don't need that for a coloring book experience, but I think it's nice to have that. And I think Dune is one of those strange projects that probably deserves more love.
How do you feel about the trend of adult coloring in general?
Well, I was coloring in kids' coloring books before adults started claiming my territory. So I feel wary of it, but I don't want to judge anybody. But more or less, this is an adult coloring book, right?
Yeah.
If you give this to a child who needs to do excellent work, I just imagine tears being involved because this is...
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's like, okay, how do you stay on the lines? And it's like, well, you have to decide which lines, like, where do they end? And, like some of the textures here, it's like, okay, well, how do you deal with that?
It's an oldest child's nightmare.
I like that. That's very specific.
Is
Are
that
you?
your excuse? You're the oldest?
I'm the middle.
Oh, okay.
Oh. Yeah.
Nice try.
Hey.
No, I'm the oldest
Shot in the
of
dark.
mine. I know. The,
So, also accompanying the new hardcover is a wonderful audiobook that I've been really enjoying, with all kinds of people doing the voices for the dialogue. And
Oh, wow.
the narrator is this really obscure person named Simon Vance,
I know that name.
who narrated one of your audiobooks that
That is correct.
the publisher asked you, oh, who would you like? And you said someone like Simon Vance.
Yeah.
And then Simon Vance said, okay, I have questions about your book because I wanted to get this right. And
That's one of my favorite stories about getting the Fifth Ward books published, is that they asked me about a reader. I said, well, I'm a big fan of Simon Vance, and somebody like him would be fantastic, but I know you're not going to get Simon Vance. And then one day I opened my email, and I have an email from Simon Vance. And I was like, oh my God. But then I'm running around telling all of my friends and family about this, and they're all like, who? And I'm having to explain why this guy is such a huge deal in the audiobook world and why he's one of the most amazing readers ever. So yeah, the idea of him reading Dune is...
He sounds just British enough to be fancy, but not so British as to be... And like, he might not even be British, do you know?
He is.
He is.
Yes, although he has lived in the U.S. for a very long time.
So he hits the sweet spot between sounding fancy enough, but not so fancy that I feel like...
And he's got this very...
You don't feel underdressed.
He feels... his readings feel both easygoing and spot on. He's just got these great instincts. As a reader and a storyteller, he's good with accents. He's good with just putting emphasis where it belongs. Yeah, he's just amazing in every way, shape, and form. I can only imagine how awesome it would be. I'll have to actually check out the Dune audiobook for that reason alone. I think I'm overdue for a new reading of it anyway. It's been about 10 years.
I'm really enjoying it now. When it comes to, I don't know, difficult literature for me, like my scholarly work was on all the impossible writers, so...
Do you consider Shakespeare an impossible writer?
No.
There's a lot of your scholarly work there.
If you... All right, well, I didn't want to get into Shakespeare.
Oh, sorry. I think it's implied, isn't it? I mean, there is Shakespearean tragedy.
If you follow the basic plots of Shakespeare, or if you see Shakespeare performed, a lot of the confusion just goes away.
Sure.
Like, it doesn't
Yes.
require you to bring a giant amount of interpretation to be able to appreciate the work, whereas Ulysses, like, I could tell you what the plot is. It won't... No giant light bulb goes on just because you know what's supposed to be actually happening in the world at that point. So I don't mean to shame anyone who finds Shakespeare's language difficult. If you're reading it on the page, which, by the way, that'd be a little bit like, oh, I'm going to sit down and read the script to Star Wars, because
Yeah.
that's a really dynamic experience.
Sure.
Like, that's kind of a weird thing to do.
It's instructions rather than...
I
Yeah.
read Shakespeare's work in a Norton anthology that had annotations and footnotes and explanations and definitions, and very much enjoyed the experience. So I would say if you're going to try to read Shakespeare, have a guide.
Yeah.
Or don't.
Or don't read it, or don't try.
All of the above.
Okay.
So I think you're the kind of reader who, like, the deeper you get into it, it requires a lot of patience, but I think that's really helpful. On the other hand, there are people who are like, okay, I'm trying to follow the flow of this thing, and then, wait, interrupt, okay. What does that mean? Okay, well, in the 15th century, this is what it meant. And you're like, okay. And then, okay, and the next word in the sentence, and there's a footnote there. And some people will just walk away into traffic rather than read the book at that point. So I could see some readers going, like, the light bulb going off, and they're like, oh, I really enjoy the process of going from no understanding to perfectly good understanding. And then there are other readers who would frankly lose their shit if they had to go through that. And I approve of any approach, including not dealing with it at all if it really makes you mad and pissed off.
True enough. Your thing about performance and how performance makes it make sense. I have always been amazed how infrequently high school teachers who are teaching Shakespeare think to do that.
to make students perform it.
Not just perform it, or even I honestly think there's nothing wrong with if your students are about to read Romeo and Juliet, show them a movie version of Romeo and Juliet. That way they know what's going on, they get the plot, they get the characters, and they get some of that humanity of it, and then you can read it and pay attention to the words and the finer points. And you're not completely befuddled and confused anymore.
I saw a matinee of Romeo and Juliet with high school students. Like, it was packed because, local high school students.
Was it the DiCaprio one?
No, like a live
Oh,
performance.
live performance matinee. Okay, my bad.
At the Shakespeare Theater.
Orlando Shakespeare Theater, yeah. And it was Romeo and Juliet, which is a young person's play, and there were a few nods to teen culture, like at the party they played some like Renaissance thing, and then it just stopped, and then like Katy Perry's Teenage Dream played, and I didn't know I could like that song, but in that context, surrounded by all these teenagers, and here's like I could feel it in the room. Like, no, they understood it. They liked the play.
Yeah.
And if you're like, okay, this is good for you, we have to study now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
This
the
is-
thing that
take
kills
your
it.
This is that
medicine.
vegetable you hate. Yeah.
That's always the thing that kills it.
High school thespians take their jobs very seriously. They
So,
have whole
and-
competitions every year.
Yes, I was in some of those.
Oh, were you?
Yes, I was a high school thespian. Not a very good one, but I tried hard.
Well, you beat the system by becoming a writer. So.
That's where the real money is.
Exactly. Right.
None of this acting.
Man, if only somebody had explained to me back in the day.
All right, let's see. Well, I haven't broken my commandment yet.
What was your
So I-
commandment?
I'm going to color things the wrong colors on purpose because that's what I do.
That's very contrarian. I like it.
Yeah.
Well,
You're an iconoclast of crayons.
if I'm coloring, say, Mickey Mouse, it's like, well, I know what he's supposed to look like. I'm bored with that.
Yeah.
Let's make him purple. Let's make him pink.
Let's explore in precisely the ways Mickey is not.
Or rather than coloring in my color, I could just watch you. You're doing great.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Right, and Samantha's not going to win because it's going to take her a week to finish that one very dense page. All right, so which film had the better Baron Harkonnen?
Oh,
I mean, Kenneth McMillan with his horrible boils all over him is really hard to beat.
pretty great.
There are a lot of visual things about the David Lynch version that they are absolutely
Very memorable.
Yeah.
repellent, and some of them aren't
Production
even-
design,
Yeah.
unquestionably amazing.
Oh yeah, visually it's incredible, but between Baron Harkonnen's boils and
Cackling
Dean Stockwell and Brad Dourif's giant eyebrows,
Oh yeah.
those eyebrows really unnerve me. I don't even know why.
Oh yeah. I always found it really attractive, the idea of the mentat.
The human computer.
Yeah, I always found that such like an attractive notion, and I don't know why. It's just like I don't think of myself that way. I mean, like I can say things that'll get someone to like punch me. You know that I'm very good at that, but yeah, like the actual calculation. But yeah, something about like at some level the silicon fails and you have to go back to the organic, and that's I think like one of the brilliant things about the science fiction like world building in this book, you know, in this
the
series.
idea that it's this big cyclical thing where it's so far in the future that they've kind of not regressed precisely, but they've shot off in weird divergent directions.
Found
with
the limits.
abandoning computers for human computing and perfecting the human mind and opening perceptions with the spice and all that stuff. And
Yeah, in the book, you know, I'm like, is this related to our world at all? And like, okay, it's supposed to be the year 10,000 something.
yeah.
And it's like, and then someone quotes St. Augustine. And I'm like, hold on. It's
Well, you know, some things endure.
Well, yeah, and to select those things is one of the great works of the fantasists, or you know, whatever you like. You're right.
So Dale, have you read? How many of the books have you read?
Only the
'Cause
first one.
Only the first
I've
one.
and honestly, I've in recent years I've started to think maybe I at least needed to try Dune Messiah, because I hear Denis Villeneuve might actually get to make a movie of that. But I'm still not sure if I want to commit to that or not.
I would not like to discover that I have read the most of the Dune books at this table.
I think you probably have.
Because I've read through God Emperor of Dune. And I said to myself, okay, I think that's enough.
That's what I've heard from. That's what I've heard from. And see, that was the thing. I grew up with some. My brother had a lot of friends who were sci-fi and fantasy nerds who passed it on to me, and a lot of them had read the Dune books, and they said flat out, they were like, "Yeah, the first couple are cool, and then it just goes to some very strange places." I kind of lost interest.
Truly, it does.
So I'm like, well, if I know that already, I don't need to go there then.
But apparently the immediate sequel didn't have that problem.
Or at least
Dune-
not so much.
Dune Messiah? Or
Yeah.
Children of Dune? Which one is the second one?
I thought Dune Messiah was the second one, but maybe I'm wrong.
I read Dune in 1984, so I cannot be the expert in this conversation.
Come on, John.
Yeah. I mean, I think I read it I think I read Dune in the late 90s, which would have been high school for me. And then I think I read the others, like, maybe in the early 2000s. I think, like, when I was in film school, I might have read them.
Yeah, see, this Baron Harkonnen looks too nice to me.
Not enough foils?
He looks...
That the one in the illustration.
He looks like the Michelin Man.
Oh,
He
yeah.
looks like me if I were the Michelin Man.
I actually think that's kind of an interesting contrast between the two different movies, is that David Lynch went for texture, like ultra texture, and Denis Villeneuve went for this, like, smooth and clinical feel almost.
But giant slug of a person.
Yes.
Who can levitate.
Yeah. And who better to do that than Stellan Skarsgård?
You have a wonderful kitchen, cousin.
I always loved the juice box.
Juice box?
Yeah, in the Lynch film, right? There's like some little critter, and it's just like, and he like squishes it and then sips it.
Oh
that
my
was
God.
so gross, and I love
I
it.
had forgotten about that. I blocked that out.
Yeah. Everything's a juice box in the Harkonnen world, right? Like everyone's got a little plug, and
Oh,
you
God,
open
and
it
the
up.
heart plugs, yeah.
Yeah, just different juice boxes. It's a juice box based culture.
Which I remember that making a big impression on me as a kid when I saw that in the movie. I was like, oh my God, what is that?
Oh, and there are mythical beasts in his costume here. All right, there's no way I'm going to be able to...
Don't give up, John.
You got it.
Use the sharpener.
Nope, that would be cheating.
You want some colored pencils?
You can use my markers if you want.
Nope, I have to stick with these materials. Yeah, so, I mean, some of the pages are relatively simple, and some of them are just really, really intricate.
What I find interesting is that the visual style and the way it shows some of the characters and the settings, it evokes some of the Lynch stuff, it evokes some of the Villeneuve stuff, and it also goes in its own direction at the same time.
Some of it's, hey, here's the book stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Does one of the Dune experts at the table want to tell me what this circle here is? What is this
I'm gonna
circle?
flip to the page.
Oh, man. Is that in the background, or is it floating above the papers that she's got there?
I can't tell, but I feel like
I feel
it
like-
might be in the background.
Oh, that's the end.
Because if it were floating above the papers, it might be less central in this window and closer to her body.
Possibly. If it were floating, I would say it might be like some kind of a floating light, like almost like a lamp.
Okay.
Yeah, there's like a lot of floating drones in the
Those Dune people are all about floaty stuff.
They're about the floating. Yeah, I think it's a light source. That
Okay.
makes sense to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll paint it black.
Perfect.
Cue
It's
the
a
Rolling
way to
Stones
go.
music. Yeah, so I've now seen the Villeneuve film 3 times, and every time I see it, I like it more. Uh, so the setup of the book is the House Harkonnen has been um, revoked, right, from
Yeah.
uh, the, from the planet Dune, and the House Atreides is going to take over. And the Villeneuve film is very clear. The Harkonnens have been at war with the Fremen, and it's kind of indicated that that conflict is one of the reasons why they're being yanked, even though that's kind of a fig leaf for this other conspiracy that is at play. What is the explanation in the book? Do you remember?
Not specifically, no. It's been, like I said, it's been a while.
Well, I think there's like an implied manipulation that the Atreides have grown in power, and that the Emperor would like to, use this sort of thin excuse to give the Harkonnens a chance to sort of ambush them before they get a firm hold.
Right.
He's trying to weaken their power because he's worried they may overtake him.
Yeah, by giving them a sort of impossible task to regain control of a place that's been so badly abused by, these sort of monstrous people with a juice box-based society.
But they had an official reason,
More.
and I'm trying to remember what the heck that was. Like, I remember there's a reason given in the David Lynch film, and it's not the same.
Does it have something to do with the spice production itself? Like, they're literally just they're not producing and exporting enough? I'm grasping at straws. Like, I feel like that might be part of it, but I really don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like a medieval form of capitalism at work.
Well, it's very feudal.
Yeah.
Which is another thing I always found interesting about it. This sort of like, oh look, it's 10,000 years in the future, but mankind still likes to put emperors in charge of things and let them parcel out power to people.
Yeah, I don't find that surprising.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
And of course, one of the ironies is the House Atreides would not make a power play against the Emperor.
Yeah, no, they're the good guys. I guess
But-
that's one of those proofs of the bad guys always ascribe to everyone else their own motivations.
Well, normally I feel my heart fill with hate when a film adaptation comes out and then attention kind of sort of goes on the book.
But yeah,
Like, it just rankles me.
Why?
I guess because the assumption is, oh, movies are exciting and books are not, but the
Yeah.
book is happy to get whatever like secondhand attention may come through. I
Like
feel
a
like,
new printing and an adult coloring book.
yeah, and except this is such a great coloring book.
It is a really good coloring
is a
book.
great coloring
I'm
book.
having a good time.
And I don't feel that way about Dune, right? I mean, I think the paperback version of this does say like now a major motion picture,
right.
but it used to be when they would make
They do the
a-
movie
a-
tie.
a-
Movie tie-in.
the movie
covers.
tie-in, it would be like the movie poster.
I hate movie
on-
tie-in covers. Even to
And-
books and movies I like.
They just don't age well.
No.
Well, yeah, it's a little embarrassing because it's like, I mean, the design on this particular hardback, and I'm doing this because I really want Ace to take a look at some stuff that I'm, no, but I mean, sincerely, this is beautiful illustration that conveys so much of the sense of the film, and it doesn't require a sort of like Chalamet swept hair look.
Yeah.
And I like him as an actor, and but he doesn't
yeah.
need to be on the cover
It's
of this
not about
book.
him. It's
not.
about what's in that book.
Yeah.
As it should be.
So I do feel like Ace has threaded that needle pretty well here.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it's the recognition maybe that it's also well, then again, I'd have to look back and see. I think there were movie tie-in covers for Lord of the Rings. I was going to say it.
Oh, of course.
Maybe it's the recognition that it's a prestige property to begin with, but that didn't stop anybody with putting movie covers out for Lord of the Rings, so.
Oh, I guess I've gone all green here. Yeah, I think I'm artistically enough inclined to know how bad I am.
That's okay.
And good enough to where people who don't expect anything like visually artistic from me can go, oh, that was actually pretty good.
Good job, John.
Which is a little bit like, I don't know, complimenting me for not getting food in my hair when I eat.
Well, look, when it comes to creative stuff, I think there's something that a lot of people forget about, which is it's okay to enjoy doing creative stuff and not really be good at it.
It's important too. I
Yeah.
think even important.
It's supposed to just be fun and expressive and something to take you somewhere. That's all.
Well, and like I think, yeah, maybe I can wind this even back around to Dune, but like the idea that there are some inherent human activities, and creation is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you know, yeah, something about like having art as a part of your life, even if you don't work in a creative field, that really matters. It makes a huge difference in your sort of like peace and your ability to function.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I didn't get back to Dune with it, but, you know.
Well, you know, I think the novel is not especially visual, and yet it's remarkably specific about the stuff in the book.
Yeah.
But in terms of, okay, like panoramic, like what am I looking at? Like there's very little description of the scenery.
No.
And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why it's been tantalizing for filmmakers for so long, even though
They feel like they've got carte blanche.
They can project a lot onto it.
what do we want it to look like? And you know, I think this coloring book kind of lets us to be the director of our own little movie here,
Indeed.
just in terms of colors, but still, that's
Color's
That's
a
something.
big thing in a movie.
Absolutely, it is.
Well, yeah, and especially in this, I was again thinking about the Lynch version from the production design perspective, and they do so much to create something visually interesting, but it does have a kind of like a limited color palette. It is quite like, you know, sepia, you know.
Yeah. I think my biggest, and I've rewatched the Lynch version over the years from time to time,
Yeah.
and I think my biggest complaint with it has always been it doesn't feel human. There's no humanity to it or emotion to it at all. It's amazing visuals and amazing crazy ideas, but everybody is like on quaaludes and barely coherent.
I just despise and I think this is a, you know, David Lynch, I don't think had any intention of this being the case, but it's the damn like self-narration, you know, of thoughts.
The worst.
And it's just so sloppy. And it's something like a studio executive would say like, well, this is weird and people are going to be frightened, so we should have Paul Atreides say in his head and we'll hear it out loud.
The worm is the spice.
You just
The spice is the worm.
Exactly. It's just like,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah, no, that always drives me crazy too. It bugs me in Terrence Malick movies when I see it there too.
Does anyone have a color called parchment?
Parchment. I'm gonna look on the box. I doubt if it's not in that box that it's in this
Probably
one.
not.
for a little 24
Not
count.
this
That might
peachy,
work.
fleshy one. That's what it comes out
Flesh.
like.
Yes. Perfect.
That
Thank you.
might be good for parchment.
Ooh, this is nice.
Yeah, I think Dale's the one to beat.
It's pretty
It's
impressive.
Not a competition, John.
You just proved it's a competition by saying that.
I mean, I think, yeah, like going back to that idea of doing things whether or not it's something that you're good at, and also like not being afraid to, have something that you sort of fail at over and over again. That definitely, definitely is an
Matter of
amazing
fact,
thing.
I would actually even say, as an artist who has spent many years trying to get somewhere as a published writer and even just get published, I think it's almost necessary to also have side interests as a creative person that aren't necessarily your main thing, because it keeps you a little bit humble and it allows you to have something on the side that's like, oh, maybe this can inform this.
Dimension.
The fun I have over here can help me remember to have fun over here while I'm trying to be taken seriously.
And also, since writing is a miserable life,
My God, yes.
that being bad at art, but you have permission to be bad at art, you're
Yes.
like, all right, like, going back to the humility, just, all right, like, you know what, this isn't going well, and that's totally okay.
Yeah.
No one's going to yell at me.
I'm not in trouble at all.
Nobody's going to yell at me. Nobody's even paying attention to me.
Well, that's my general advice to writers who are worried about negative feedback. I'm like, don't.
Be glad you're getting any feedback.
People are not gonna, the good news is the same as the bad news. Nobody cares about your writing.
I think it's a miserable life just because we're in competition with ourselves.
Yes, that's very true. I think having realistic expectations is hard too. I think this is actually one of the only things that I think social media is actually really good for nowadays, is that I see a lot of writers, published writers, well-known writers with lots of followers, talking very frankly about what their career arc has been like. And saying things like, look, it took me 10 years to get to this point, or 20 years to get to this point. And just hearing that and knowing, oh, so if I'm 36 and I still haven't published anything, or I'm 40 and I still haven't published anything, I'm not a complete loser. I'm doing pretty much what everybody else is doing.
This is a standard path.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
I'm a loser like everybody else,
That too.
including people who have successful careers. Because to write a book that's worth reading, you're going to have to learn new things as a writer to be
Yes.
able to pull that off.
Yeah.
Unless you can somehow do theme and variation for the rest of your life. And there are writers who kind of do that, but not the writers I love.
Yeah. And very often the thing that gets you somewhere is a thing that you weren't even trying that hard on. You just kind of did it maybe instinctually, or like, oh, let me try this, see if this will work.
This actually brings up an interesting question. Was this book considered a success when it first came out? And again, the first copyrighted date I have in here is 65.
I feel like I remember reading somewhere that it was one of those kind of like cult hits. Like it immediately hit a certain portion of the population, young people especially, in a certain way, and they became very passionately engaged with it, but it wasn't necessarily like a huge monstrous bestseller right away.
It's because it's interesting. Like it's obviously a book that has fired imaginations and inspired generations of different writers, filmmakers, etc. I mean, but
Well, but sci-fi back in the day was pulp, right?
Yes, it was.
So the measure of success
Perhaps.
had to have been in a different context, right?
Yeah.
Because Dune now is a classic. Like, readers of literature who maybe don't like science fiction or will cop an attitude, like, they don't do that with Dune.
Yeah, exactly.
it has something that gives it a pass. You mean, or it's like staying power?
Now,
or
yes,
just- yeah.
absolutely. But back in the day, right, it needed to sell well for a pulp,
Right.
not as literature.
Yeah. But people eventually came to the point where they could recognize that there was artistic merit there and intellectual merit there, even if it was in a form that they weren't used to giving that credit to.
And then 2001: A Space Odyssey comes along and kind of gentrifies science fiction for a mainstream audience.
I do sometimes feel with Dune a little negative about one particular aspect of it, and it's the I don't want. It's hard. I don't think appropriation is the right word, but the the borrowing of motifs that are pretty distinctly Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
And that and sometimes I do find that a bit simplistic, it lacks a kind of imagination. I mean, I guess maybe culture shifts and influences become a bit more bare, but yeah, that still bothers me a bit.
Yeah.
Sand couture.
Then again, Star Wars had the Sand People,
Well, and you're not wrong. I mean,
which the Book of Boba Fett, I think, half the reason why that show existed was, okay, let's try and
Let's do something.
retcon this so that it's trying to understand this culture as complex rather than simply
Right.
barbarians in the desert bad.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a thing I've found as I've gotten older. It's in any book or movie that tries to portray any given culture within that story as completely and totally wicked or evil. It's like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, the world just does not work that way.
You're doing it
Well,
wrong.
Also, let's talk about the name Baron Vladimir.
I mean, this is a good point.
But everybody knows guys named Vladimir. You can't trust him.
No, but yeah, I mean, there definitely is this sort of like cultural reference. I mean, like, what's the emperor's name?
Shaddam.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah, part of me feels like it's, as you said, it does probably harken back to a kind of like
Harkonnen back?
it's harkening
Sorry.
that's fine.
back. You had to go
Couldn't
there.
cut that part.
As my 11-year-old would say, please stop.
What if I could? What if I
Um,
could?
But I feel part of it could just be sort of those were the reference points that Frank Herbert had, and he wanted to make use of them.
Yeah.
And some of it is also, he could be trying to say something like, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
That's generous, but yeah.
Just couldn't have known that would end up completely overdone over the
Yeah.
next 40, 50 years.
or how much war would change the color of the observations too.
Yeah. I also think he was writing at a time where it was a lot less common to create, whether it was names, cultures, religions, like to create those things from a whole cloth, like in a Tolkien.
I say, are we spoiled by
sense.
Tolkien?
Yeah. Well, even at the time, technically, he and Herbert were kind of contemporaries, but yeah, Tolkien, he sort of spearheaded that whole, I'm just gonna make all this up. I'm gonna make working languages because I can do that.
Gifted linguists.
So yeah, sometimes I try to be generous in my mind and just say, yeah, Herbert he was working with what he had.
Well, that's kind, and fair.
Well, and I think it's this complicated thing. Like he's learning from Middle Eastern culture and mysticism and borrowing. I don't think he's actually stealing, like, the names of things and directly, stealing anyone's specific religion.
No.
And there's a lot of love and respect there, even though we could go, yeah, it's not a good look necessarily
Right.
to exoticize and simplify, making your own DIY religion out of.
These simple people, have a deep connection to the land. But
Is that your 1950s documentary voice?
Yes, yeah. Perfected, certainly by watching Mystery Science Theater shorts. Yeah. Catching Trouble. No.
Whenever they show a short, you knew, oh no,
Yeah,
this
boy.
could get real bad.
Yeah.
A Day at the Circus? No.
I will also say that while my sci-fi reading is not probably as extensive as it should be, having read a lot of stuff, I'm the kind of reader that when I get into things, or like back in the day when I decided, I might want to write sci-fi, so let me read some sci-fi. I try to approach it almost academically. Like I find out what are the important things, what are the things that everybody says I have to read, and I'll start there.
Give me the canon.
And then branch out from there. And I feel like when I was reading a lot of old sci-fi back in the day, Dune, even though it was old at the time, felt very fresh and very modern compared to something like Asimov or even Robert Heinlein. So I think in a way Frank Herbert, he deserves some credit for kind of modernizing science fiction. He sort of brought it into a different realm of thought and theme and texture that it hadn't really been in before that point.
I like that.
Well, I get the feeling with Asimov, right, that it's our world with like a handful of things different,
Yeah.
but more or less it doesn't require the backbreaking world building
No.
that Herbert's doing.
Yeah. No, nobody, and I think it's interesting that Herbert and Tolkien were kind of doing their thing roughly at the same time. These two guys, all on their own, were just like, hey, what if we tried just a little harder to make these worlds both stranger and more realistic at the same time?
Well, I don't know Herbert's story, but I presume he didn't have a choice. I presume this is the way the book came out,
Right.
like when he was writing it.
Yeah. I don't know for a fact. I don't think he spent the time on it that Tolkien spent on Lord of the Rings. Certainly, Tolkien was working on that for decades, basically decades of prep work, and then it was like, oh, I guess I'll write something now.
Well, I got these languages lying around.
Might as well write a story.
That Hobbit was pretty good. I could probably earn some more money if I don't know, wrote more books instead of just, studies of these languages that don't exist.
Well, hey, linguist gonna linguist. That's the way of things.
All right, so this border, my coloring book page is kicking my butt now.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. It's very bold.
And I've decided to go crude with my coloring style.
You decided, or that's just how it came out?
After it came out that way, I've decided that's the way it's working.
You're not going crude.
Naturally occurring.
It's rustic.
Oh.
It's distressed.
It's antique.
There you go.
So do these two movies tell the same story?
Yes, essentially. Although the newer one
Had the good sense to break it up.
had the good sense to not
Instead of
try and
trying to
cram
get the whole
entire
book.
into one movie. Yeah.
So the David Lynch one is hard to follow, and memory serves, like it just stays hard to follow.
Yeah.
Okay,
It
so
does.
at this point in the David Lynch, we're quite far ahead of.
Correct.
Okay.
So
Well,
I,
actually, no. This is still early on. This is before the betrayal and all that stuff. I think.
Spoilers.
I didn't say who or what.
but I think like this is why I was a big fan of the Sci-Fi Channel series, because again, handling that as a sort of like larger story makes so much sense.
They gave it more. They gave it the space it deserved, and I thought they got the story stuff right. I think my biggest complaint with that version was it just kind of felt not grand enough. That Dune should feel grand.
Yeah,
and it
there's
didn't feel that way.
struggle with the Sci-Fi Channel's budget is sort of
and
notoriously
the pretty early primitive CGI of the time.
yeah. What was that? 2003, 4, right?
It was early. I think it might have even been 2001 or 2. But I mean, it was a good effort. It was a heroic effort, and I give them credit for it. Same with the second one. It just still didn't quite scratch the itch, the Dune cinematic itch that I always wanted to scratch.
All right, I think I may have made Baron Harkonnen just a little more upsetting to look at.
And that's saying something.
That's good. Yeah, that's a
But
solid thing to do.
It's not more upsetting than the David Lynch version, because frankly, most horror movies cannot compete with.
So bad. So bad. One of my favorite little grace notes in the newest version, the Denis Villeneuve one, was I thought I saw a number of visual cues, especially in the Harkonnen scenes, that were sort of like echoes of Apocalypse Now. There was one shot in particular where
hand
he's
on the bald
going
forehead.
around-
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's perfect. Look at you. That's one of my favorite movies. So anytime I see a filmmaker paying homage to it, I'm like, yeah, good on you.
What makes it one of your favorites?
I think it's the fact that it is both a rich and rewarding artistic statement and something that feels like an art house film, and yet it's also a huge epic adventure movie at the same time. It kind of like it satisfies the child and the adult in me at the same time.
Got it.
And there's just so much about it that's just memorable and crazy, and yeah, it's
So I actually think the Villeneuve version is further along than the David Lynch version somehow. Yeah, no, actually, if memory serves, I think
We're mid.
there's like a whole
mid,
epic that happens
chaos
in like the
here.
last 20 minutes
yes,
of the David Lynch version.
right.
I keep saying the David Lynch version. He did not have Final Cut, which then led to a new policy he had, which is he will only make a film if he has Final Cut.
Yep.
He will not lift a finger until that is in the contract.
But doesn't knowing were you aware that David Lynch was one of the directors that George Lucas considered for Return of the Jedi?
I am.
Doesn't that kind of make you wonder what sort of movie David Lynch would have made in that case?
I think it would have been exactly like Jodorowsky's Dune. I think it never would have happened.
Probably.
Um,
Lucas would not have let Lynch loose to be Lynch.
Well, I do get the sense, okay, Return of the Jedi, I think Lucas was losing energy.
Yeah.
He was also getting divorced.
Yeah.
And his wife, I think, is, as an editor, kind of an important reason why those movies are as good as they are.
Yeah.
I don't mean to diminish his
No,
accomplishments, but
no. I've always
she is underrated, though.
I've always
Yeah.
felt like he was the idea guy, but he needed people with very specific and developed skill sets to help him bring those ideas to fruition. And when he tries to do it all himself, or send it all through the lens of himself,
He may have gone too far.
something always goes wrong.
But, you know...
bet the Emperor
I-
would have had a lot more boils, though.
Well, I
Yeah.
think that Lynch... You know, he would have been a great concept designer,
Yeah.
you know, but basically, you know, George Lucas wanted a babysitter for a director, and that's not David Lynch.
No.
So I don't think it could have actually come out. As it is, you know, working with Dino De Laurentiis, David Lynch had a lot more power, although not as much power as he needed.
Right.
But, and that movie just about killed him. No, Lynch just talked about it, and he like he hadn't seen any of the Star Wars, and George Lucas, this is a Wookiee, and David Lynch was like, I've got a headache, and he took him out for a meal where all you could eat was salad, and David Lynch was like, this is a non-starter.
That's not going to work for me.
It's like, I don't know if you need to feed him, but if you give him coffee and cigarettes, he'll probably be fine.
I like to think that there was a time in my life that was true of me too.
All right, what color have I not abused yet? All right. All right, looking at this, I'm reminded of, I got to interview Barry Temple, who was a Disney animator for years and years. And he started out actually working for Ralph Bakshi, and then he worked on the Super Friends.
Oh, wow.
And his memory from the Super Friends is he hated having to animate Batman because his utility belt was just such a pain to move. Like, the general figure of Batman was fine, right? Like, the silhouette is easy, but that damn utility belt. And now I'm coloring utility belt stationary, and I'm like, oh,
No wonder.
yeah.
Like, now you understand his pain.
A little bit. Just a little bit.
It's very Beatles.
Oh, where can I put a blue meanie?
There you go. That's the version of Dune we should have gotten at some point. An animated one that looks like Yellow Submarine.
We'll see what Nickelodeon does with it.
Nick Dune.
Was it Evan Dworkin did Milk and Cheese? Am I getting that right?
Yes.
And
Wow.
Nickelodeon apparently, like, some executives are like, "Oh yeah, we love your comic. We want to turn it into a cartoon show." And he goes, "For kids?" And they're like, "Yeah." And he goes, "You realize my characters are alcoholics prone to severe violence, right?"
What?
It was a real Hollywood moment.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Boy, I love Milk and Cheese. The comic. And well, I guess also the products. But.
All right. Clearly, I'm not going to finish this in this sitting.
Well, what would you have done differently?
I think I would have studied the border here more carefully and made more judicious calculations about how to go about it.
You'd have calculated.
Or maybe I would have challenged Dale to a fight so I could get his markers, because I think the precision of those would have...
All you had to do was ask, John.
Didn't even need violence.
it wouldn't feel the same.
You're like, no.
We need to go out back, and I will say, "I will kill him!"
I can only keep what I take.
I want this cape.
I think I'm happy with mine. I think
We
I'm
need to
done.
bring capes back. There need to be more capes in the world.
I think I'm eccentric enough. But I endorse your willingness to wear a cape.
Well, so yeah, that actually begs the question: are you a cape with epaulettes, you know, and was sort of very fancy, or are you more of a sort of like Hobbit cape, you know, sort of
I
like
would probably go with more of like a Jedi thing.
Ooh,
Not necessarily
okay.
the brown, but just a nice flowy cape with a really cool cowl.
Yep.
Maybe something I could wear off one shoulder, you know.
Star Wars has this recurring thing where people sort of like put their hood up for anonymity,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting like.
It's like there's not a lot of people walking around with their hoods up.
Yeah,
so
like, also in capes with a lightsaber dangling from their belt, you know, it's like.
nobody's gonna notice.
Suspicious person walking here.
But I mean,
But a
that's-
suspicious anonymous person.
We've yet to talk about still suits, and I feel like that's a pretty important topic, and I just wanna-
Wisely, both films don't mention how it also processes urine and feces.
And that's
Right.
I actually adore that.
And then you could drink it
aspect
later, and
of
it's like,
the,
I don't...
I mean, it's gross, but it's wonderful too. I mean, like,
it makes sense.
Yeah.
In context.
But also, it's easier to absorb that information in text rather than...
Yeah.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
There's a part of me that has always felt that I can almost imagine what water from a still suit would taste like.
And I think that that I've thought about that.
I know
a
what it tastes
lot.
like. The water fountain from your elementary school. It's that water.
Oh,
A bit
man.
sulfurous.
Oh my god.
Oh,
Or
that's-
yeah,
Like,
the
it won't
backyard-
kill you.
Or the backyard hose from the well, you know.
Oh no.
Am I wrong?
No, yeah,
I
that
think
makes
you're probably
sense. That makes sense. But there is something sort of like brutal about this sort of like desert survivalism, and then just like pissing and shitting on the go. and-
How few people actually... That was one thing I was wondering, you know, in my getting back in touch with Dune is... right, because if I were writing this from scratch, in the first act, somebody has to die in the desert just from the
Yeah.
heat, and
You have to drive
we
that
don't
point home.
see that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's an interesting-
or
yeah,
even
that's a
just a
good point.
skeleton, like, damn it,
Here's
all
this
right.
guy out here.
No, the most
That
dangerous.
was Larry.
The most dangerous thing in the desert is this scene right here, right, where he first encounters the Shia Lud, and
Yeah.
that's
Oh, he-
driven home. Is
He,
that
he overdoses or has an allergic reaction,
Yeah.
but he's tripping while they're doing this emergency evacuation.
I thought this scene was especially good. Like, I thought what I loved about it was that shot when they're pulling up and he's on the gangplank of the ship, and you've got the worm in the background, and it's just so enormous. You know?
And they're all in the same shot. Sometimes
Yes.
spatially, I don't know what's going on in the
Yeah.
Denis Villeneuve movie, but that shot where they're swooping, and it's like locked into the ramp, right?
Yeah.
That was really effective. Right, what are you doing there?
I'm just trying to create like
Extra texture.
depth with shade, yeah. Which kind of goes against the idea of the tarot card, but I don't know. I abandoned that a while ago.
Hey, the tarot cards were just to get you started.
Yeah.
I don't know. He could be altering all our fortunes right now.
He could be.
You can read your tarot if you want. I also don't have to.
Well, I once had a tarot reading, maybe the only time, by someone who was, a bona fide mystic. And this person was hired for the year 2000's New Year Day at a party, and the whole idea was, hey, everybody, come get your fortune read. And the psychic was supposed to, do the tarot reading and just go, yeah, oh, you'll have exciting opportunities at work soon, which could mean any, like.
Vague
So I put my
newspaper-
cards out, and then she goes, "Okay, listen. I'm only supposed to give positive or vague messages, but I see things. Something tells me you want to know whatever it is I see." And I'm like, "Yep." Like, I don't know if I believe in this, but I certainly don't
But
want the
that is
fake
true.
version of whatever this
Yeah.
is. She read me right.
Well, what did she say?
I don't remember.
But it felt.
But it was
Couldn't have been that portentous then.
it was while I was at Purdue earning my PhD. So if she predicted you'll be in misery and loneliness in an alcoholic haze
Absolutely true.
every other day, I don't know that it needed psychic powers to actually. First of all, yeah, it was North Central Indiana. You know who was drinking?
Everybody?
Everybody over the age of
Oh,
10.
Lord.
It was.
I saw a psychic once. It's when I was like between majors. In undergrad, I think I was 19. No, probably 20. I was like, should I study computer science so that I can make money? Should I
So you made the
study
wrong choice.
creative writing? Well,
Who's this psychic?
I did mushrooms and saw a psychic. And
Simultaneously?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Well, the next day, the mushrooms were at night, and I woke up the next day feeling better than I ever had in my entire life. And I was like, wow, maybe I am depressed. And there happened to be a psychic fair that day. So 2 friends and I went, and I was expecting it to be like some like woo-woo mystical, like highly themed environment, but she was just wearing like jeans and a t-shirt. And I walked in.
But was it a mystical T-shirt?
I don't remember.
That's a psychic.
It was a
interest.
Def Leppard T-shirt. Because that's what psychic.
It would depend on the album. Then.
Sorry.
No, you're okay. I walked in and she said, I need your first and last name, your date of birth, and the city you were in on your last birthday. And I gave that information to her, and then she typed it into a laptop.
Oh no.
Cyber psychic.
And she said, you're a writer, aren't you? And I was like, what? Because, like, I've Googled myself at that point, right? Nothing comes up. I hadn't even chosen my major. And it's not like I had anything, like, public. Like, there was nothing on any... My social media was on lockdown. I'm a very private person. So, no. There was nothing that... Except... Yeah, I don't know what gave me away. And I was like, yeah. And... basically, she convinced me what I already knew.
All right, Dale, can I borrow a lime marker?
Absolutely.
And I changed
you
my
can.
major for
We'll
the
fight
fifth
for it
time,
later, but I'll use it now.
and finally managed to graduate. So thank you, Jackie. I did send her a
Oh.
graduation announcement.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's
Yeah,
good.
She didn't respond.
No, yeah. That's fine. She knew it was coming.
Yeah.
So, in the beginning of Dune, one of the things that I found striking is just how, Paul is wise for his age. Although in the David Lynch one, he's like 30, but
Right.
The actor.
wise enough for his age. But what do I want to say here? There was real jealousy and protectiveness over a sense of what one knows. And it seemed like all of that information had to be conveyed verbally, and there's like judgment surrounding one's ability to know a situation, assess a situation, know what all of it means, and also being disciplined in the way that you regard the world, so that when Paul is brought before the Bene Gesserit priestess or whatever position she had to be tested, and he might, I feel like it could have been presented a little bit better in that she reveals after the test, oh yeah, we would have killed you if you didn't pass the test. And it's
Yeah.
like, if I knew that beforehand, I would have worried a little more.
But if you know that, it ruins the test.
But just how protective and arrogant and competitive, Paul seems to be with what he knows.
Yeah.
I thought was a really interesting thing, and I guess it reminds me of how I felt in the early days of being a literary scholar, and really having almost no skills and having spent my life reading all the books I was supposed to be ashamed of in grad school, not including Dune. But yeah, I did find that to be maybe Herbert was modeling for us, like the way we should be in absorbing the information contained in Dune. Like proud of how much we're learning and like really
look at what you know.
It's an interesting point. I like that.
Yeah. Well, and it also kind of drives home how in the book, in the movies, because they are in this far future where human skill, human intuition, human insight and intellect has had to take the place of computers and technology, then it suggests that they take enlightenment, or whatever you want to bring with that, very seriously.
Yeah, in fact, it's a necessity for interstellar travel and
Right.
for function.
But even the complex political machinations between the different houses, and it just it's like it goes without saying that these people in positions of power in this world have to be intelligent and make good decisions and quick analysis, because that's the difference between living and dying.
Is that not true of every world?
I guess that's kind of true. It's just more true.
it's true here in Florida, to be sure.
Oh, Patrick Stewart.
Yes.
I forgot. I was just thinking about. I didn't even see his scenes. Oh, well. Sorry. Side
The movie still exists. You can watch it.
I know. It's on now, and I didn't see Sir Pat, and I'm sad.
I love how Patrick Stewart has become like an international treasure.
Oh yeah,
We all just love the guy.
it's wonderful.
All right. So here's a coloring trick I have. To make it look crude, like I meant to do that, I just start taking random colors and then just sort of shading in who knows what. Pink. What will this do? Let's find out.
Actually, the crayon on top of the colored pencil is giving me nice shade textures.
You're a better graphic artist than I knew.
Thank you.
Why have we never colored before?
Actually, yeah.
This is a good question.
That's fantastic.
Why are more people not coloring together?
We're doing a coloring party.
Well, I'm guessing, all of us chose different pages, and, without a coloring book worthy of summoning my friends together,
I mean, this is
maybe it would be less fun.
coloring book.
In my possession, I have multiple Disney coloring books, but I really don't need any excuse to just rant on Disney for hours on end.
Well,
You've experienced that a little.
Yeah, I more than a little, but I don't think I'd be as inclined.
Apparently, I owe you an apology.
No apology needed.
Oh God.
I end
What did
the
you do, John?
conversations when the Disney gets a bit thick for me. I say, well, I gotta go. But I think that's a fair point. Because having a sort of like mutual interest on the subject matter. I enjoy how much you like Disney. I don't know that my pleasure in it is similar, and that goes only so far. So. But the fact that we share,
I think you enjoy
collectively an interest.
My enjoyment of Disney more than you enjoy your enjoyment of Disney.
This
itself.
is true. This is true.
My warped view of it.
I think you've given me something to think about. in that space.
I
But
feel like I'm going to have to get one of these Disney conversations at some point, because now I'm intrigued. I need to know where you stand on this, John.
Oh,
He
well,
stands in line for 2 hours for the rides. And
I mean,
that's
No.
one version of it.
I'll do that.
I used to
too.
do that once when they were new. I think we're getting far afield of Dune.
Oh yeah, well, that's okay. Fair.
Other than, I really want a Dune ride. I need a ride where there's a giant Harkonnen like hovering over me, like the Harry Potter ride where I found this shocking because I was a little depressed riding the ride, and then you're attacked by like 6 Dementors, like 2. I get it. Like, no, they're coming after you, and I'm like,
like,
I don't
whoa.
need help being depressed. But if there was a
Doing
giant
just
Harkonnen
fine.
laughing, or all right, frankly, I love the new Harkonnen. You know,
He's pretty awesome. Yeah.
he's less
Drippy.
visually interesting, but
Less
but
squeegee.
the voice. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the sort of rumble
Yeah.
of his voice. I love that he it's weird. It feels like he's chewing scenery and being subdued all at the same time.
Well, I feel like, and maybe this is a response to, I don't know, more recent Star Trek movies, but I do think Villeneuve really has toned down almost everything.
Yeah.
There's no broad score. I can't remember any musical things. I mean, there was the bagpipes when they arrive on Dune,
that was solid.
and then
the
there
music
was,
is very like sort of impressionistic.
and then there's
It's-
that Digaroo sound when they're beating with the mercenaries for the Harkonnens.
Yeah.
But mostly it's just, okay, there's some stings in there and there's some textures, but there's very little musical accompaniment. And I feel like Villeneuve was insisting, no, we're watching the story here. This isn't about who can punch who in outer space. This is, there's some of that, but mostly it's about, this much bigger picture.
Right.
And so, like, there's no Beastie Boys song in Dune. And
I have a friend whose Beastie Boys are his favorite band, and he's angry about that use of the Beastie Boys in
Yeah.
Star Trek.
I don't even like Star Trek, and yet I respect it enough to be upset on behalf of my Star Trek loving friends who are like, why can't you just give us something that looks like Star Trek, that feels like Star Trek? Why do you have to yank it and then jam it into Star Wars on steroids?
It's a noble mission to make Star Trek relevant to modern Beastie Boys fans.
People complain about remakes no matter what. If it does the same thing, it's why are we just getting the same stuff over and over? Isn't there anything original?
Yeah.
And if they go too far in the other way, this makes no sense. What am I looking at?
Well, what I love about Dune is, like, okay, he's really pared it down, and if we're not into the story, it's just going to be a slow story. I think my wife said, thank you for showing me this beautifully boring movie after we watched Dune. And I didn't feel, well, I guess I felt the same way, except I don't know if I would go quite so far as to say boring.
It's
Like, I'm not bored.
no,
Um,
but it's not going out of its way to thrill you or to keep your attention. It's basically saying you need to just pay attention.
yes.
Was there too much setup in the first film of the new ones? Was it too much focused on getting toward what would be the sort of thrilling finale? I mean, no, this is full of action.
Well, okay, one radical thing the newer film did was it begins not with, well, I guess it begins with the Harkonnens, but it begins with the Fremen.
Yeah.
Like, this is the Fremen story because this is an epic about Dune. The Fremen are there already. So
Yeah.
if we begin with the House of Trade, like, right, it takes forever to get to the point. So despite the fact that the movie feels a little disjointed and there's a lot of exposition, much less exposition than in the 84 film, but still a lot of exposition, I do feel like beginning with the Fremen and like they're ambushing the Harkonnens as the Harkonnens are hunting them. Like I do feel like that was a really valuable way to begin. And yeah, if it's like if you're not taking any interest, if you're not into a slow build, then this just isn't for you.
Yeah.
And every time I watch it, it does get better. But it's drab even before they get to Dune. And I do kind of miss the sort of bombastic style, the Dino De Laurentiis style of the Lynch film.
I will say I really like I always like the design of the still suits in the Lynch version, and I sort of kind of wished they had stuck with it. I've always been a big believer that if you're making a remake of a movie or doing a new interpretation of a source material, like you should I feel sometimes like they go out of their way to not look like any earlier versions of that were made, and sometimes I'm like, you know what? If it was good in a previous thing, feel free to keep it. Just if Disney did a remake of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I want the Nautilus to look like it always looked, because that was
which
the
is why
best
they
Nautilus.
shouldn't remake it. There's no reason to remake it. Release it in theaters. I'll go. I'll watch the original all over again.
I love the original.
So, yeah, I think the excuse to sit down and color in these coloring books with you guys has led me to re-engage with Dune, and I'm getting so much more out of it than I did back in the 1980s, you know, when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Oh, dinosaurs.
Was the world in black and white, as my son would say to me?
No, that was my early childhood in the 70s. That's when everything was in black and white. Although I think one thing that young people, such as young Samantha here, can't probably appreciate is just when I was a kid, you know, if it wasn't on TV, I couldn't access it.
Yeah.
So the idea that we have two versions of Dune playing at the same time in this room is so exciting, and you know, I feel spoiled.
Yeah. I like the digital age for stuff like that.
We also have the great book here. And, you know, this is... All right, so I'm a stickler for hardcovers. Like, if I can own the hardcover, I really want to own the hardcover. I think this dates back to high school when I got into fights, and books can be used as weapons. And this is a hardy weapon. And I do put these library kind of plastic covers on it because I used to drag all my hardcovers into bars, and I wanted them to have a fighting chance of not being whiskey soaked forever. And you know, I really love that they, you know, gave us a new hardcover edition of Dune that I could own, because I don't have $400 to try and own a hardcover from back in the day.
Yeah.
Maybe there wasn't even a hardcover. I'm sure at some point there had to have been a hardcover before this, but when it first came out,
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it's probably, well, all right. I am collecting old sci-fi books, and they do have hardcovers, so it's not unthinkable. But I also love the classic look of this. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't clash with the film, but also it's not screaming, hey,
Yeah.
cinephile, please read this little book.
50 years from now, that will still
Look classic.
good. Yeah.
All right. Are we done? How long have we been going, Matt? 2 hours?
Not quite, because he hasn't even started to train them yet. I do have a question for you guys
Okay.
about the movies.
By all means.
Do you feel as if at this point, because we have two versions of it, that the subject matter needs to be held on to as if it's sacrilegious to think of it or translate it in a different way? In other words, do we need to hold on to it the way that it's always been, or does the next time that it gets made be open more for interpretation.
Game of Thrones style?
I mean, if that's your choice, if that's how you'd want to go with it.
Yeah, I like the
No, I was just going to say, I think...
Hold up.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure if you're on the mics, so your answer has to include the question.
Okay. I was going to say, I think what I'm hearing is that you're asking...
No, yeah.
If the initial impulse is to make a faithful film, now that we've had two films that are faithful in different ways, will the next one that comes along down the line, can it be a little freer? Does it have to be so faithful? And yeah, I think that's cool. I think it's cool when people... I think the farther you get from the source material, the easier it is to do that. So...
Well, and if we think about, I think one of the enlivening and exciting aspects of the unrealized Jodorowsky film was that it did drift from the subject matter, and not that that there is like this sort of need to stick with what that unrealized version is. But I mean, I think another filmmaker with a similar pedigree of outsider thinking could take a crack at the subject matter and find a new relevance that is beyond simply retelling the story itself. So yeah, I'd be down to see that. But then again, I'd be down to see just about anything. So.
Yeah. All right.
Excuse me.
I
think before... Sorry, before we finish, we should probably look at what you have done.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
maybe
Well,
you
let me put a tag on his point, and then we can wrap up, and then you can get stills and everything. All right. Well, then I guess I'm going to be the conservative of our group and say that the basic story needs to be respected. All of the major elements need to be respected. What I do like in the adaptations is when some of the dynamics of the story become clearer. Like, okay, why is House Atreides taking over Arrakis? Like, what is the official reason? Even though we know that's not the actual reason, to me,
Right.
that adds so much texture to the story, and I don't know that it's crystal clear in the novel.
Yeah.
And the Villeneuve, okay, there isn't peace on Arrakis.
Right.
And House Atreides is there to build peace. Actually, the Emperor wants them to die there, and he's going to hamstring them and do everything possible to, help them fall as a house because he's worried about them. But kind of like in The Godfather, there are some things where I'm like, okay, I still don't fully understand what they're talking about all the time. And I think it's just because they're trying to cram in so much.
Yeah.
And admittedly, you know what? Rather than a 4-hour version of The Godfather, maybe I don't have to understand every little speck. Maybe it's okay if some of it is just kind of still a pretty great movie.
Yeah.
Even if I can find some fault with it. But ultimately, we're getting more Dune from Denis Villeneuve. So I don't want any recastings of Dune for 50 years. After I'm dead, go ahead. But I do think that, I do want it to, I want the core of the story to be deeply respected.
Right.
And one avenue, Jared, to go back to your earlier point, that could open up for a new telling would be, and we're probably going to see Denis Villeneuve attempt this or deal with it more deeply, as just the mysticism of the book and how it's dealing with not really other cultures that exist, but things definitely inspired by other cultures that actually do exist. And he doesn't have to be true to those other cultures, but he has to be, the storytelling should be sensitive to that and be as complicated and multivalent as those actual cultures. So to me, that's, but I don't think you necessarily have to throw out major parts of the story or casually recast it in order to do that.
Yeah.
That's my guess anyway. Then again, I'm sure many, many spirits have been broken on the wheel of Dune trying to adapt it into film. Did Jodorowsky ever have a script?
Yeah, I mean, I think they had a full treatment.
How many
people?
people? Well, that's not a script.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that it was developed from the script to the treatment. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it would have been a 6-hour movie.
Yeah.
With a budget of more money than anyone had in the
Yeah.
early 70s.
Correct.
Yep. And that's sad, but at the same time, I think the fact that there are versions that exist and they are respectable and interesting visually and narratively, that is a soothing thing, because it is such a beautiful book.
All right, Samantha, it looks like you somehow got a whole lot of coloring in.
I did.
Excellent.
I like how you tested the colors on the side there.
Yeah, I'm glad I did, because most of the time I didn't go with the first one. This.
Have you made art before? Because that looks like a ringer's trick.
What does that mean?
It means I tried my colors out on the page I was coloring.
Oh, I have made art before. I'm not very good at coloring. I never have been. But it's not a competition.
Truly.
Oh, good, because you didn't win.
No, you clearly won.
I don't know about that.
The gold pops.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, I tried to go with. It probably comes from all my comic book reading over the years.
A lot of great shading in there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And I could see how the markers really cooperate with the sort of complexity of the illustration.
Yeah.
Yep.
And sometimes I wished I had tested the colors, because every now and then there would be things where it's like, I wish that hadn't been what it was. But overall, I think that it came out okay.
Well, if you're a slop artist like me, they're all good colors. Just throw more on there. Just throw more on there.
It's a very green Baron Harkonnen. My bad.
I didn't want to stereotype the Harkonnen family.
No.
Like, they're such a juicy, villainous group that, like, in normal street clothes, they're scary.
Yeah.
I don't need to try and make them extra gothic. And Jared.
Oh yeah, I
this
was trying to play with the idea. I mean, obviously it's a non-human or non-sapien, creature, but yeah, I was like trying to find what was interesting about like sand and spice and Muad'Dib at night, and trying to like create something a little psychedelic, even though it's not quite there. But yeah, that was fun.
I love it.
Yeah, no, that's gorgeous.
And
I like mice.
we've barely, and so there's just most of the coloring book left. And
Only
the
all
coloring
of it.
book, the coloring book also, right, extends further than the Villeneuve film. So there are parts that are just
Yes.
from the book.
Correct.
And thank you all for joining me. This was
Thank you
a lot
for
of
having
fun.
us, Jeff.
Thank
Yeah.
you for having us.
This
Thank
is
you,
cool.
Penguin Random House, for the free coloring book.
Oh my God.
Ace
Yes,
Books.
thank you.
Ace Books.
Sorry, I
Ace.
read the copyright.
An imprint
Thank
of
you,
Penguin.
Ace.
They are an
Books.
imprint of Penguin Random House.
Yeah.
They're all family.
It's like, this is my coloring book.
I'm keeping it.